Welcome to MysteryCon. Tonight, we dive into a case that has haunted investigators for decades. An alleged UFO crash cover-up, an experimental technology buried in Arctic silence. December 11th, 1996. 31 travelers on a desolate Yukon highway stop dead in their tracks as the stars vanish, blotted out by something the size of a stadium, gliding silently over Fox Lake. This is the story of Ethan Cross, a former investigative journalist who risked everything to uncover the truth behind what witnesses called the Silent Colossus. A massive triangular craft reported by more than 30 people during one of the harshest winters in Canadian history. The location, Fox Lake, deep in the Yukon Territory, an air corridor monitored by NORAD, the very heart of North American air defense. Why does this matter? Because the official reports disappeared. Because NORAD issued a Priority 1 stand-down order, the highest level command, one that overrides every standard defense protocol. And because nearly 3 decades later, the same signals that woke that craft are beckoned the few people who know the truth are vanishing. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. And drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. I always thought the Yukon was a place where silence came easy, a land so vast and white it seemed to swallow sound whole. But that night, in December of 1996, the silence felt wrong, like something had been ripped out of the world and buried. Beneath the snow, I was sitting in a rented cabin outside Whitehorse, listening to a late-night AM broadcast through the static hum of a cheap radio, when I first heard the voice that would change everything. It belonged to a man who called himself Frank from CarMax, his tone low, hesitant, like he was speaking with someone's hand on his shoulder. He said, what they saw wasn't from here. Fox Lake, 96, the whole sky, gone. Then came a burst of interference, a sharp crack of dead air, and the line went silent. The host stammered, tried to get him back, but Frank never returned. They moved on to UFO jokes and trucker talk. I couldn't. Back then, I was 42, working freelance after being pushed out of network television. Too many years chasing stories. No one wanted to hear political leaks, corporate black budgets, the stuff advertisers hated. My last assignment was a segment on aerial anomalies over Alaska. The network killed it, calling it to fringe, and that was the end of a decade-long career. But old habits die hard. That night, as snow battered the cabin windows and the temperature outside plunged below -30, something in Frank's voice lodged under my skin. I pulled out my laptop, the same battered Toshiba I'd been dragging from motel to motel, and started digging. Archives were thinner than I expected. Just a handful of clippings from regional papers and an old RCMP blotter. But the pattern was there. December 11th, 1996. Between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m., 31 people reported seeing a massive, silent craft over Fox Lake. Witnesses described it as a black triangle the size of a football stadium, gliding so low the treetops swayed. No engine noise, no contrails, just an immense shadow blotting out the stars as it moved south across 130 miles of wilderness. Some said it had lights along its edges, others claimed its surface shimmered like heated metal. The RCMP called it unidentified aerial activity, then went dark at 2:17 a.m. According to one obscure log I found in an archive defense newsletter, NORAD scrambled to interceptors from Elmendorf. They never got close. The planes turned back within minutes. No reason given. That detail bothered me. Fighters don't turn around mid-scramble without orders. I kept digging until my screen filled with a grainy scan of a single-page document, its text blurred by time and fax lines. At the top, in bold, was a classification. Stamp I hadn't seen in years. NORAD, alert. Stand down, order priority 1. The room felt colder as I stared at those words. Priority 1 was the highest level of directive that didn't just override local command. It shut everything down. Why issue that for an unidentified craft over Canadian airspace? My pulse hammered as questions tumbled through my head, each one heavier than the last. If they told NORAD to stand down, then someone wanted that object. Left alone by 3 a.m., my desk was a mess of notes and cigarette ash. I was about to call it a night when I heard it. A soft scrape, like paper sliding under a door. I froze, every instinct prickling awake. The cabin's only door faced the empty road. No cars, no tracks in the snow when I came in. I rose slowly, crossed the floor, and there it was, a single sheet of paper, thick stock. No markings except for one line typed dead center. If you value your life, don't dig deeper. The ink looked fresh. My hands started to shake, not from the cold this time. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, someone knew exactly what I was doing, and they were close enough to warn me. I locked the door, killed the lights, and sat in the dark with that note in my lap, the words burning hotter than any headline I'd ever chased. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, because now I had two questions keeping me awake. Who left the note, and what the hell happened over Fox Lake? By dawn, the Yukon sky was a pale sheet of steel, the kind that promises no warmth. I left the cabin early, note folded, in my pocket like a live wire. The air bit hard at my face as I started the truck and let the engine grumble to life. There was no going back now. Whoever slid that warning under my door wanted me scared enough to stop. That had the opposite effect. My first lead was in Carmack's, a frozen outpost 2 hours south. If Frank from the radio was real, this was his ground. The drive felt endless black spruce forests, frozen rivers, and a sky that seemed to press down like a weight. Snow swirled across the highway, erasing tire tracks before they could freeze. Out here, the land doesn't forgive mistakes. I stopped at a small diner near the Yukon River, the kind of place that survives on truckers and hunters. Inside smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon, a thin lifeline against the cold. I asked about Frank, the waitress. A woman with silver braids and eyes like weathered glass shook her head. No Frank here, she said, but her tone was too quick, too practiced. I left a tip and a business card, then headed toward Fox Lake. The lake stretched under a white crust of ice, framed by black hills. It was beautiful in a desolate way, the kind of beauty that hides things. I parked near a faded sign that warned of thin ice and followed a trail toward the water's edge. The wind howled across the frozen expanse, carrying whispers of nothing. That's where I met her Marjorie Lakefield. She came up slow from a cluster of pines, bundled in layers, her breath fogging in the air. At first, I thought she might be a trapper, but when I introduced myself and mentioned December 1996, her face changed. She was older than I expected, late 70s maybe, her cheeks raw from the cold. She studied me like someone measuring intent. "You're not the first," she said finally. Her voice was gravel, worn but steady. People came back then, asking questions. Mounties, suits from Ottawa, Men who didn't belong here. What did you see, Marjorie? I asked. Her gaze drifted over. The lake, it was like. The sky stopped working. Stars went out, one after another, like someone blowing candles. And then it moved slow, no sound, big enough to block the horizon. A shadow that wasn't a shadow. It glided over us, and when it passed, the stars came back. I asked her to describe it. She pulled a worn leather notebook from her coat and opened to a page yellowed with age. The sketch hit me like a punch. A black triangle, edges sharp as razors, underside glowing with 3 panels that pulsed in a pattern. It matched reports from the Belgian wave in the 90s, from Phoenix in 97 cases I'd studied years ago. Marjorie closed the notebook. It wasn't from here, she whispered, and they knew it. You think those jets went up here for nothing? I didn't answer. She stepped closer, her breath forming ghosts in the air. Be careful, she said. They still watch this. Place asks too much. You'll end up like the others. Before I could press, she walked away into the pines, vanishing like smoke. I headed back to the truck, boots crunching on snow, thoughts spinning. As I reached the driver's side, my phone buzzed an unknown number. I answered. Stop asking about Fox Lake, a voice said. It was flat, mechanical, like a bad text-to-speech program. Go home, Mr. Cross. Then the line clicked dead. My stomach knotted. I scanned the empty highway. Nothing but drifting snow and skeletal trees. Still, the silence felt crowded. When I got back to my motel, the door was ajar. My heart spiked. Inside, the room was a mess, papers, scattered drawers yanked open. My laptop was still on the desk, but when I powered it up, half my files were gone. Erased clean, all but one. Buried in a recovery folder was a single JPEG, grainy and underexposed. It showed a dark shape hovering over snow-draped pines, its outline jagged and impossible to mistake. Timestamp, December 11th, 1996, 3:14 a.m. My pulse thudded in my ears as I stared at the image. For years, I'd chased stories like this, but now the story was chasing me, and someone out there didn't want me to see what came next. The JPEG haunted me all night. I stared at it until the pixels blurred, convinced the image would change if I just looked long enough. But the shape stayed, the same, a dark mass blotting out the Yukon sky. Edges sharp and deliberate, real to real. By morning, the storm outside had eased into a fine powder, wind carving the highway into endless ribbons of white. I packed what little I had, shoved the photo onto an encrypted drive, and left the motel behind. Whoever trashed my room hadn't taken the laptop. That wasn't mercy. It was a message. We can reach you whenever we want. As I drove toward White Horse, I checked the mirror more than the road. Twice I caught glimpses of dark SUVs in the distance, silhouettes against the pale horizon. No plates, no decals. They never got close, just lingered, then slipped back behind curves like predators pacing the edge of sight. By noon, I holed up in a coffee shop off 2nd Avenue, the kind of place with steamed windows and locals hunched over mugs like they were lifelines. I logged onto a secure network, hands trembling as I typed into an encrypted chatboard I hadn't touched in years. It was a haunt for people like Meader's graced reporters, ex-contractors, ghosts who traded in whispers. I dropped a single line. Fox Lake, 96 Any chatter. Minutes crawled. Then a ping, username, Aurora 67. The text read, what you're chasing was an alien. It was ours. built from Manitoba wreckage, 1952. I froze, reading it again. Manitoba wreckage. The only crash near there I'd ever heard of was a blip in old RCMP files, dismissed as a weather balloon. I typed back fast, "Who are you?" No answer for a long beat. Then, someone who worked the hangar. We called it Project Colossus. Anti-grav prototype from something we didn't build. You think that triangle was the first? Meet me, Whitehorse Bus Depot. Tomorrow noon, my fingers hovered over the keys. Before I could reply, the chat window vanished, wiped clean like it never existed. I sat back, heart hammering. If this was a trap, it was a good one. If it wasn't, then everything I thought I knew about the Fox Lake craft was just the surface. Outside, dusk was already bleeding into the streets, and the cold bit deeper. I headed for the truck, pulse still racing. That's when I saw it. A black SUV idling across the lot, its windshield reflecting nothing but sky. A man sat inside, face shadowed, posture rigid. I walked fast, boots crunching on packed snow. The truck loomed ahead, my only anchor in a world tilting too far off-center. As I reached for the door handle, a shape broke from the Aliyah man. In a parka, tall, clean-shaven, wearing gloves black as oil. His eyes met mine, and in that split second, the world narrowed to silence. "Mr. Cross," he said evenly, voice smooth like steel on glass. Then he flipped open a wallet badge knot. RCMP, not any agency I knew. Before I could speak, he stepped back, gaze cold. "Stop asking questions." He turned and walked away. No rush, no threat in his pace, just certainty. I climbed into the truck, fingers numb on the wheel. In the mirror, the SUV was gone, like it had never been there. That night, back at the motel, I killed the lights and locked the door with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. "Don't meet him." The words pulsed on the screen like a warning beacon. I stared until they burned into memory, then powered the phone off and yanked the battery. Sleep didn't come. Every creak outside sounded like a boot on snow. Every flicker of headlights through the blinds felt like a rifle scope. Around 3 a.m., the power cut. No hum from the heater. No glow from the street lamp outside. Just darkness, and then, for the briefest second, red dots danced across my walls. Lasers targeting optics. I hit the floor and crawled to the far side of the bed. Breath ragged, ears straining for the crack of a shot. But nothing came. The dots flickered once more, then vanished with the silence. When the lights returned, 20 minutes later, the room looked untouched, like nothing had happened. At dawn, I opened my laptop, praying the chat logs had survived. They hadn't, wiped clean. Except for one encrypted ping time stamped 3 minutes before the blackout. "Meet me in Whitehorse, tomorrow, before they find me." I stared at those words until they blurred, a single thought drilling through the noise. If I didn't go, I'd never learn the truth. If I did, I might not come back. I didn't sleep. By the time the Yukon sun crawled above the horizon thin and cold as aluminum I'd already packed, scrubbed my devices for tracking malware, and memorized 3 alternate routes to Whitehorse. The roads were a frozen ribbon, treacherous, under a pale blue sky, and every time headlights appeared behind me, my chest tightened like a vice, end like a vice, as I drove. I kept thinking about the word Aurora 67 used, Colossus. It sounded like something from a Cold War fever dream. But the Manitoba wreckage that was real at least in whispers. In 1952, radar logs out of Churchill picked up something moving faster than any jet at the time, before it simply vanished. The official line was balloon interference. The truth. Files were sealed so tight you could cut your hands on the edges. White Horse slid into view around noon, a scatter of low buildings hugging a river glazed in ice. I parked a block from the bus depot and spent 10 minutes circling on foot, scanning. For black SUVs, mirrored lenses, anyone lingering too long. Nothing. Still, the air felt charged. Like a storm waiting to happen. I ducked into a library 2 blocks. A woe-neutral ground and pulled microfilm from archives I'd requested the night before. Old papers, curling and yellow, but enough to feed the fire. December 96, headlines. Strange lights over Fox Lake RCMP, investigating. A week later, a retraction buried on page 6. Witnesses likely mistook air traffic. That was the script. Admit nothing, minimize everything. Then came something stranger reference in a 1997 budget report. Buried under infrastructure. Improvements was an allocation for geophysical studies, subsurface magnetics. Funding authorized, jointly by Transport Canada and NORAD. I scribbled it down, my pulse ticking higher. Subsurface magnetics isn't about weather balloons. It's about anomalous things underground you can't explain. I hit the microfilm again, chasing threads through old UFO chatter. Project Magnet reports from the 50s. Officially, that program ended in 54. Unofficially, declassified memos hinted otherwise. Recurring mentions of material recovery and gravity propulsion studies at remote sites across Canada. And then I found it a fragment from a Defense Research Board memo, undated but filed under 1982. Field test platforms will require extreme thermal shielding and compartmentalized crew enclosures. Retain bismuth magnesium composites for secondary layering. Testing confined to Arctic corridors. Bismuth magnesium. My throat went dry. I'd heard that pairing before in old interviews with a physicist who claimed it was the key to field propulsion. The same kind Bob Lazar mentioned years later. If those alloys were in Canadian files, it meant one thing. Reverse wasn't just an American obsession. We were in the game too, as I packed up. My phone burner number, 4 buzzed. A text, no sender, ID. You're being watched. Leave now. I didn't think. I bolted out the side exit into an alley, crunching through hard snow toward a crowded street. My eyes scanned every reflection store windows, passing cars. That's when I saw them. 2 men in heavy parkas, moving slow, eyes fixed on nothing and everything. Their stride was too deliberate. Not locals. Not casual. I looped through side streets, heart pounding like a drum, until I reached the truck. My knuckles whitened on the wheel as I pulled out, checking mirrors every 3 seconds. I took the long way to the motel, doubling back twice, until I was sure no one followed. Back in the room, the air felt wrong, like someone had been there. I swept the place, vents, sockets, under the bed. Nothing obvious, but paranoia's a survival tool in my line of work. I powered up the laptop, isolated from Wi-Fi, and dug deeper into my notes. That's when the final piece slid into place. Aurora's last message mentioned Manitoba, 1952. Combine that with Project Magnet's unofficial files and the alloy. REFERENCES, and a picture emerged. Whatever appeared over Fox Lake in 96 wasn't an isolated event. It was a culmination. Decades of buried tech, Arctic testing grounds, and black budgets hidden under innocuous line items. Then an email hit my secure inbox. No subject, no signature, just an attachment. A satellite thermal scan dated 3 weeks ago. Northern Yukon. Permafrost plateau carved into a shape too geometric to be natural, an opening in the ice, glowing faintly against the cold, and beneath the image, a single line of text. They never stopped building. My hands went numb. If this was real, it meant the Fox Lake craft wasn't going, it was home. And someone had just shown me the door. Tomorrow, I'd meet Aurora 67. If he survived the night. The Yukon twilight comes fast, like someone dimming the world with a slow, deliberate hand. By the time I reached the White Horse bus depot the next day, shadows had already pooled along the edges of the lot, long fingers stretching across ice-slick pavement. The air was brutal -20, maybe colder, with a wind sharp enough to cut through wool. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in slow, my breath fogging like smoke signals. The depot sat squat and lonely under a pale sky, a strip of windows, throwing weak light onto the snow. Inside, the place smelled of diesel and old coffee. A few travelers huddled on benches, their faces buried in scarves, shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. I scanned every corner, mirrors, blind spots, exits. Nothing unusual, no SUVs, no mirrored sunglasses. Still, my pulse thudded. Like a drumline, I picked a seat facing the entrance and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20, my nerves crawled. Every creak of the automatic doors jerked my attention. Then I saw him. He came in from the north lot, hunched in a parka too big for his frame, who'd drawn low. His gait was slow but steady, like each step was an effort against time. He moved past the ticket counter without a glance and sank onto the bench beside me. "You're late," I said quietly. "You're alive," he replied, voice thin and rasped by years. He pushed the hood back, grey hair cropped close, skin like paper, stretched over sharp bones. His eyes were the kind you don't forget hard, but hollowed out by something heavier than guilt. "You, Aurora?" I asked. He gave a small nod. "Name's useless now, but it'll do. Who are you really?" He looked past me, scanning the room before speaking. "Canadian Forces, Engineering Division, retired before you were chasing stories." His lips tightened, trembling slightly. "I worked the vault, the one under Fox Lake." The words landed like a hammer in my chest. "Vault. What does that mean?" He leaned closer, his breath ghosting in the cold air. "It means you've been asking the wrong question. It wasn't a ship. It was a container." I blinked, trying to anchor the thought. "A container for what?" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the glass doors like he expected wolves to come through. "Something old. Something we didn't build and couldn't move. Found it in the permafrost during a seismic survey in 51. They called it Artifact Zero by 52. Ottawa signed on with Washington. That's when Project Colossus began our attempt to reuse what we found. Reverse engineer it," I said. Aurora's lips twitched into a humorless smile. "That was the dream. But you can't copy a hurricane, son. You can only stand in the wind and hope it doesn't tear you apart." I pressed him. "So Fox Lake, 1996, that was your test flight." His gaze hardened, glassy with something between shame and warning. "Not a test, a recovery. Colossus 3 went off-grid. We chased her across 130 miles before she blinked out. blinked out. Gone, he said simply. Not a crash, not a downed bird. Vanished like it was never there. And the men flying her Canadian pilots never came back. The words hung between us, heavy as lead. You're telling me I'm telling you this? He cut in, voice sharpening. That thing we pulled from the ice wasn't dead metal. It was dormant. And when we woke it up, his hand trembled as it fished something from his pocket of flash drive, black as obsidian. He pressed it into my palm with surprising strength. Blueprints, logs, thermal scans. The truth, get this, to the public. If you can survive, the metal burned cold against my skin. Why me? Because you're the only one dumb enough to keep asking, he said with a flicker of dark humor. Then his eyes slid past me, and his voice broke to a whisper. They're here. I turned. Glass doors parted with a soft hiss. A black SUV idled at the curb, exhaust curling like breath in the freezing air. Two men in heavy coats stepped inside, their movements precise, surgical. Faces pale and unreadable. Move, Aurora hissed. I shoved the drive into my jacket and followed him through a side exit into the biting cold. Snow crunched like bones under our boots as we cut across the lot toward an alley between freight containers. Behind us, the depot doors slammed and voices bucked low, sharp commands in a tone that didn't need translation. Aurora stumbled, breath ragged. Go, he rasped. Don't wait for me. Not leaving you. You will. His eyes met mine, clear for the first time. They can't have what's in your pocket. That's all that matters. A shot cracked a muffled pop, swallowed by the snow. Aurora jerked, staggered, and fell hard against the ice. Blood bloomed like ink on the white ground. I dropped to one knee. His hand clamped my wrist with iron force. Listen, he croaked. The hangar, permafrost plateau. They moved it north. Find it. End this. Give me coordinates, I said, desperate. He tried to speak, coughed instead. His grip slackened. The light in his eyes dimmed like a bulb on dying power. Boots thundered closer. Shadows stretched across the snow. I tore free, heart punching my ribs, and ran. Across the lot, over the chain-link fence that shredded my gloves. Down a service road glazed with ice, until the depot lights shrank behind me and the Yukon swallowed everything in silence. When I finally collapsed behind an abandoned trailer, lungs on fire, I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and stared at it, small, weightless. Yet it felt like a black hole, pulling everything into its gravity, my career, my life, maybe more. I checked the horizon. No lights, no movement, only the endless white stretching toward. Nowhere, but I knew better. They'd find me again. They always do. The wind howled across the lot like a warning, and in that sound, I swear I heard his last word echo back through the cold hangar. The Yukon highway stretched like a scar across an endless expanse of snow and pine. My truck roared against the cold, engine whining, tires chewing through frost-slick asphalt. Behind me, Whitehorse was already a smear of light swallowed by distance. Ahead, nothing but pale sky and the gnawing hum of paranoia. Every few minutes, I checked the mirrors searching for black SUVs. Headlight pairs, too steady to be coincidence. Nothing yet. Aurora 67's flash drive rode in my breast pocket like a second heartbeat. I hadn't plugged it in, not yet. Doing so felt like pulling a pin on a grenade. Instead, I kept my focus on the road and the coordinates he'd managed to whisper before his voice gave out. North, plateau. An abandoned weather station carved into permafrost. No map, no signage. just stories, half-buried mentions in geological surveys, and the odd declassified scrap hinting at subterranean structures in Arctic corridors. As the hours bled away, the land grew stranger, lonelier. Pines thinned to skeletal fingers. Hills broke into jagged teeth against a grey horizon. My fuel gauge dipped dangerously low before I hit a settlement, a scatter of shacks huddled around a steel gas pump, snow curling like smoke from tin chimneys. The attendant was a man with eyes that had seen too much winter. He didn't speak as I filled the tank, didn't blink when I asked about the old weather station, just slid a receipt across the counter with hands cracked like old leather and murmured, "Don't go digging where the ground hums." Those words followed me long after the settlement vanished in the mirror. By nightfall, I pulled off the highway onto an unmarked track choked with snowdrifts. The truck growled in protest as I crawled uphill, tires spitting ice, until the world narrowed to a plateau rimmed by wind-battered ridges. There, beneath a bruised purple sky, I saw it, a skeletal tower listing in the wind, its guy wires thrumming like violin strings. A weather station, or what was left of one, hunched against the permafrost like a rusted sentinel. I killed the engine and stepped into air so cold it flayed the inside of my lungs. Snow crunched underfoot as I crossed to the tower, up close. The structure was gutted, panels torn away, instruments rusted into silence. But the ground around it was wrong. No drift, no frost heave, just a perfect circle of bare, hard-packed snow. I crouched, pressed a glove to the surface, heat faint but real. My pulse jumped. I circled wide, boots sinking into knee-deep drifts, until I found it a metal hatch recessed flush with the earth, its seams sealed tight with rime. Faded stencils flanked the handle, property of NORAD, and beneath it a number that meant nothing, at least not yet. The padlock was new. That told me two things. This site wasn't dead, and someone was coming back. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to burn the coordinates, vanish south, let the Yukon bury its secrets. Instead, I reached for my pack, pulled a pry bar, and worked the lock until it snapped like brittle bone. The hatch groaned as it opened, exhaling a breath of stale air, tinged with something metallic and sweet, like ozone after a lightning strike. I lowered my flashlight into the void. A steel ladder plunged into darkness, walls ribbed with frost-limbed conduit. I started down. Each rung burned cold through my gloves, the sound of my breath loud in the tunnel's throat. 50 feet down, the shaft widened into a corridor paneled in brushed metal. Strips of dead fluorescent bulbs lined the ceiling like blind eyes. My boots clanged on steel decking dusted with frost. And then I heard it. Faint at first, low thrum, rhythmic as a pulse, coming from deeper within. The same frequency embedded. In that JPEG, the one that made my teeth ache when I stared too long. I followed the sound through a warren of corridors, past rooms stripped to bones, overturned consoles, rusted gurneys, cables snaking across the floor like veins. But the hum grew louder, steadier, until I reached a set of blast doors half-parted on their hinges. Beyond them yawned a cavern man-made, but vast enough to swallow a cathedral, and hanging there, cradled in a lattice of steel girders, was a shape I'd seen only in sketches and nightmares. A triangle of black metal, its edges scalloped with frost, its belly webbed with panels that shimmered faintly under the beam of my light. The Fox Lake craft, it looked dead, but the hum rolling through the chamber told me otherwise. I edged closer, every nerve screaming, breath fogging in plumes. Up close, the surface wasn't smooth. It was layered thin plates of bismuth and magnesium alloy, just like those old defense memos. Lines of symbols scored the metal in patterns that danced when viewed from an angle, like writing that refused to hold still. I reached out, gloved fingers hovering inches from the hole, then froze as a new sound slithered through the dark, boots on steel. More than one pair. Voices followed low, clipped, speaking in a cadence I didn't recognize. Not English, not French. I killed my light and pressed against the hull, heart pounding like a war drum, as shadows spilled through the breach in the blast doors. Figures in black tactical rigs, goggles glowing faint green, rifles angled like accusations. The hum surged, vibrating through the deck. And in that instant I knew two things. One, this craft wasn't dormant. Two, I was standing inside its wake-up call. The hum climbed higher, a vibration that crawled into my bones and set my teeth on edge. I stayed frozen against the craft's hull as the black-clad team swept into the chamber, boots crunching frost, rifles sweeping arcs of darkness. Through the green glow of their goggles, they moved like wraiths, silent, surgical, trained for a kill I didn't want to witness firsthand. There were 6 of them. I counted breaths between their steps, trying to map their pattern. To broke off toward the catwalk. One knelt near the hatch, fingers gloved in matte black, scanning for footprints. Mine. I slid deeper into the shadows beneath the lattice, heart punching my ribs like a drumstick on rawhide. I needed an exit. The only path led past the craft, toward a side corridor that gaped like a throat in the far wall. 20 yards, open ground. The hum pulsed again, louder now, resonating through the chamber like the drone of some distant organ. The men paused, heads tilting as if they heard it too, not just with their ears, but under their skin. One muttered something sharp in a language I didn't catch. Another touched his earpiece and barked 2 clipped syllables before resuming. The sweep. I waited for the pivot, the fraction of a second when their sightlines broke and ran. Boots whispering against steel, breath locked in my throat. I slid into the side corridor and melted into blackness. The passage was narrow, lined with conduits iced in rime. I kept one hand on the wall, the other tight on the pry bar, moving, fast and blind, until the sound of their boots thinned into echoes. When I finally stopped, chest heaving, I listened. Nothing but the hum, deeper here, thrumming through metal like a heartbeat beneath the floor. I killed my flashlight after 2 quick sweeps, enough to confirm what I'd suspected. This wasn't just a storage vault. It was a nerve center. Consoles stood like tombstones, banks of dead monitors staring into the dark. But one glowed faintly at the end of the row, its screen awash in green code that scrolled like falling rain. I crept closer, pulse ticking faster with every line that passed. Across the glass, fragments of system logs, file headers most scrambled, some in plain English, core stability, nominal propulsion array, spooling AI, handshake, INCOMPE, then a phrase that iced my blood, pilot protocol, awaiting IMPOT before I could process. That, a metallic click sliced the silence. Cold pressure kissed the back of my skull. Put it down, a voice said, calm, almost bored. I lowered the pry bar slow, fingers loose. The voice chuckled softly. Jesus, Ethan, you never did know when to quit. The sound hit like a fist to the gut. I turned my head enough to see her in the spill of green light, Lisa Grant, former colleague, friend once, before the networks turned my life into rubble. She looked harder now, jaw cut from granite, eyes lit with something I didn't want to. Name, Lisa, I breathed. What the hell are you doing here? She smiled without warmth. Cleaning up your mess. Same as always. The muzzle never wavered as she stepped into the glow, matte black parka swallowing her frame. You should have stayed buried, Ethan. Fox Lake was dead. We made sure of it. I laughed once, hollow as the corridor, then wise, Colossus, humming in its cradle. A flicker crossed her face, gone in an instant. You think you've got it figured out? You don't even know what you're standing in. Enlighten me, I said. She tilted her head, almost pitying. We tried to keep it ours, for decades. But the second Aurora opened his mouth, the clock started. Do you know how much you've cost us already? Us, I echoed. This isn't government. Not anymore. She didn't deny it. Just stepped closer, voice softening like silk on a blade. Hand me the drive, Ethan. Walk away. I can make this disappear. No black sites, no accident reports, no bullet in a frozen ditch. You get to live out your exile in peace. I stared at her, the weight of the flash drive pressing like a brand against my chest. One move could end it either way. Behind her, faint through the corridor hum, a new sound stirred a deep groan that made the walls tremble. Dust sifted from the seams as the deck vibrated underfoot. Lisa glanced toward the chamber, and for the first time, I saw fear crack her mask. Too late, I said. The hum became a roar, low and resonant, rolling through the bass like the voice of something ancient waking from a long sleep. Lisa's grip tightened on the gun. Give me the drive, now. But I was already moving. A twist, a shove, her shot cracking against metal as I dove into darkness. The flash drive burning like a secret no one was meant to hold, least of all me. And behind us, the impossible thing in the chamber began to breathe. The roar from the chamber rolled through the corridors like a tide of iron and wind, rattling conduits, shaking frost loose from the ceiling. I ran blind, lungs burning, boots slipping on steel grates, slick with melt water. Behind me, Lisa's voice cut through the din, sharp as broken glass. Ethan, stop. Her words chased me down the passage, punctuated by the staccato snap of suppressed gunfire. Bullets chewed sparks into the walls as I dove around a junction and slammed into darkness. The hum, no. The voice was louder now, a sound that wasn't. Sound, vibrating inside bone, whispering in a language I felt instead of heard. My flashlight beam wavered as I stumbled through a maze of maintenance shafts, past coils of dormant cable and skeletal frames of machines that hadn't drawn breath in decades. The air grew warmer with each step, damp and metallic, like the inside of a lung. Somewhere above, boots thundered a dozen, maybe more. Radios crackled in clipped bursts, too faint for words but heavy with urgency. They weren't just searching. They were sealing this place like a wound. I burst into a stairwell and climbed fast, fingers numb, knees screaming. At the top, a security door yawning open, its hinges weeping rust. Beyond it lay a control gallery overlooking the chamber, the craft a black leviathan cradled in steel. But now it was moving. Slowly, impossibly, it rose from its lattice like a shadow pried loose from the earth. Frost exploded into vapor as panels along its belly ignited in a pulse of pale fire. Symbols scored into the hull writhed in the light, shifting like ink under water, and the hum god, the hum had become a symphony of pressure, each note drilling through marrow until thought itself felt fragile. Figures swarmed the gantry's operators in black rigs, their goggles spitting green fire as they rappelled toward access ports along the craft's spine. Others levelled rifles at the vault doors as more troops poured in, moving with a precision that made my stomach knot. This wasn't a containment op. It was an execution. A shape rose at the gallery's edge. Lisa, gun drawn, face pale in the flicker of hazard lights. "You don't get it, Ethan," she shouted over the din. "If it leaves this vault, nothing topside survives. That includes you." I backed toward the far exit, the flash drive like a shard of ice in my grip. "You really think you're in control of this?" Her jaw tightened. "We were, until you showed up." She stepped closer, muzzle steady, eyes lit with something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Give me the drive. Last chance. Then the floor lurched. A deep concussion rolled through the chamber as a bloom of vapor tore skyward from the craft's hull. Steel screamed. Catwalks sheared like wet paper. Operators tumbled into a fog shot through with cold fire. The blast door on the far wall slammed down with a clang that shook my teeth. Lisa swore, spinning toward the chaos. That was my opening. I bolted through the gallery's side hatch into a corridor veined with pipes and alarms wailing in pulses of blood-red light. Somewhere overhead, turbines shrieked to life. My mind snagged on the words stenciled above a bulkhead as I tore past. Launch lock - engaged launch.I. Didn't stop running until the passage split into a junction lined with sealed doors. Behind me, the hum crescendoed into something vast-like. Mountains grinding against each other before collapsing into a silence so sudden it sucked the breath from my lungs. Then came the sound that wasn't sound at all. A deep, resonant crack that made the walls buckle and the lights flicker, too. Black. For a heartbeat, the world was a vacuum. When emergency lamps flared crimson, the vault was empty. The craft was gone. A wind like the breadth of a glacier tore through the corridors, rattling steel, snuffing what little warmth lingered. Somewhere, in the distance, boots pounded, frenzied now, stripped of precision. Orders barked, hoarse with panic. I stumbled toward the freight shaft, climbed until my arms burned, and burst onto the surface, under a sky ripped raw by auroras. Curtains of green fire writhed above the plateau, veined with streaks of violet, and blue so bright they scorched the stars. And there, far beyond the ridgeline, something blotted the heavens a silhouette, vast enough to dwarf clouds, gliding silent as thought my breath plumed white as the truth locked into place. Project Colossus hadn't died in the snow. It had been waiting, and now it was free. The sky looked broken. Auroras ripped across it like veins of neon fire, bleeding green and violet against a black so deep it felt bottomless. I crouched behind a rusted loader on the plateau, lungs clawing for air that froze before it filled my chest. Above the ridgeline, the craft moved a shadow wider than any stadium, gliding without sound, its belly aglow with panels that pulsed like the heartbeat of something alive. No jets, no interceptors, nothing but silence and the brittle crackle of wind through dead towers. Either NORAD didn't know, or they'd been told to stand down again. My gut said the latter. I checked the flash drive in my pocket for the 100th time, its weight obscene against my ribs. Aurora 67 had died for this. If I didn't get it out, his voice would vanish with the snow. I started toward the truck, boots crunching through ice like glass. But before I reached it, the ground trembled. It wasn't an explosion, too soft, too steady. more like a pulse rolling up from beneath the crust. My knees buckled as another came, and another, each spaced, like the beat of some buried heart. The loader behind me shivered, frost cascading from its frame in glittering sheets. Then I heard it, a low subsonic thrum crawling through the permafrost, rising through bone and blood, turning my breath to static. It wasn't coming from the craft overhead. It was coming from below. The plateau split 30 yards to my left, with a sound like the earth cracking its spine. A fissure tore open, spewing vapor that reeked of iron and ozone. Beyond it yawned a darkness so pure it seemed to drink the light from the sky, and in that dark something stirred, not metal, not stone, something older. I staggered back as towers of ice collapsed into the rift, vanishing into black with a hiss like dying stars. Through the steam, a glow seeped upward, amber first, then white hot, radiating in rhythmic pulses that matched the throbbing hum under my skin. My phone burner number 5 lit up in my pocket, though I'd killed it hours ago. No tone, just a screen awash in static before 3 words burned through like acid. We see you. Then it shattered in my hand, a crack of glass and a burst of smoke. I bolted for the truck, every nerve screaming, and threw myself inside as the sky split with light. The craft was rising, higher now, its panels blazing in sync with the glow bleeding from the rift. I jammed the key into the ignition, engine coughing like a dying animal before it roared to life. Snow sprayed as I tore down the service track, eyes flicking between the mirror and the madness overhead. Behind me, the fissure widened, swallowing towers, loaders, and chunks of the plateau in a slow-motion avalanche of steel and ice. The hum crescendoed into something titanic, vibrating through the bones of the world, until just as suddenly it stopped, silenced. Silenced, I risked a glance in the mirror and wished I hadn't. The rift was gone, smoothed over as if it had never been just. An unbroken sheet of snow under a sky scrubbed clean of color. No glow, no fissure, and no sign of the craft. But the silence wasn't peace. It was a held breath. I didn't stop driving until the plateau was a ghost in the rear view. And even then, I couldn't shake the weight pressing against my skull, the certainty that whatever I'd seen hadn't ended. It had only begun by dawn. I hit a safe house I'd used years ago, hunting shack strung along a forgotten spur of the Klondike Highway. Inside, the air stank of dust and old oil, but it had 4 walls, a wood stove, and enough quiet to work. I dropped the flash drive on the table like a relic and stared at it for a long time, fingers twitching toward the laptop in my pack. Plug it in and everything changes. Plug it in and maybe I die. I lit the stove, hands shaking as flames clawed up through kindling, and set the laptop down. Booted to an air-gapped OS I hadn't touched since the network buried me. Then I slid the drive home. The screen bloomed with folders, dozens, maybe hundreds each, tagged with code names and dates stretching back decades. Colossus Archive Access LVL SIGMA. My breath fogged as I clicked the first file. Blueprints. Layered composites of hull plating annotated with references to bismuth magnesium striations and quantum lattice architecture. Notes flagged non-terrestrial origin in bold red stamps. Photos followed grainy black and whites of excavation pits clawed into ice. Floodlights blazing on fragments of geometry that hurt to look at. Then the logs. My throat dried as I scrolled through page after page of system reports. Handshake attempts, 1413. Status, failed pilot integration protocol, human compatibility, below 3%, and then, buried deep in a folder marked Black Swan, Artifact 0 demonstrates persistent signal emission. Pattern recurrence aligns with pre-contact myths logged by First Nations narratives. Skywalkers, silent giants, recommend termination protocol, denied by Joint Command. I sat back, the words carving trenches through my brain. They'd known, for 70 years, they'd known. And they hadn't stopped trying. The last file auto-launched a video feed, time-stamped 26 hours ago. It showed the hangar just before the breach. The camera shook as alarms strobed, bathing everything in blood-red light. Then came the craft, peeling itself from its cradle like an insect shedding skin. Panels rippling with white fire. The feed froze, mid-frame fractured into static. Then a line of text burned across the screen, stark and surgical. Transmission complete. Awaiting response. The cursor blinked. Then another line appeared, not typed but imposed. Letters jittering like teeth, chattering in the cold. Response. Received. The screen went black. I sat there, pulse ticking like a detonator, as the silence pressed close. Outside, wind scraped the shack walls like fingernails on tin, and beneath it, faint but steady, a hum began to rise. Not from the laptop, not from the drive, from the earth. The hum under the floorboards didn't fade. It deepens subsonic, pulsing through the shack's bones, through mine. I killed the laptop, yanked the drive, and pressed my ear to the cold planks. Nothing audible. Just that vibration drilling straight into marrow, steady as a heartbeat. It stopped as abruptly as it began. Silence rushed in, heavy as a lid. I packed fast drive in a lead pouch, laptop in a Faraday sleeve, stove smothered cold. 10 minutes later, the shack was behind me, a dying ember on the Klondike's frozen spine. The truck's engine coughed into life, and I pushed south, tires clawing through ruts of ice. Eyes fixed on the mirror until the horizon drowned in white dot. By the time I hit cell range, dawn had bled into a bruised morning. I slid a new SIM into the sat phone and pinged the only person I still trusted to handle truth like a live grenade. Marla Chen, a European investigative reporter with a talent for surviving enemies that vanish other journalists. I used an old phrase from our network days, red wind, our signal for a story that could burn the world down. Her reply came in under 3 minutes. Encrypted channel 5-MINS. When the link stabilized, her face flickered into view grainy, but those eyes still sharp enough to cut steel. Jesus, Ethan, you look like death thawed out. You'll look worse when you hear what I've got. I held up the lead pouch, blueprints, logs, video. It's all here. She leaned in, features tightening. Fox Lake. Not just Fox Lake. This goes back to 51. Manitoba wreckage. Project Colossus. Reverse engineering on something they dug out of the permafrost and it's awake. I expected skepticism. Instead, she exhaled like someone who'd been bracing for this call. You're not the first to whisper about it, but no one's ever had proof. Proofs on this drive. And Marlet's worse than anyone guessed. That thing in the Yukon, it didn't crash. It came home. Her jaw flexed. Upload to the dead drop, now, before the feed froze. Then shattered into static. My sat link went dark. I stared at the screen. Pulse hammering, and for a long second the only sound was the hiss of white noise. Then another tone cut through a shrill ping from the laptop, even though it was powered. Down, the screen flared to life, hijacked, cascading lines of code like rain on glass. Then a message burned across in letters so stark they seared the retina. Stop. I killed power, ripped the battery, heart punching my ribs like a jackhammer. That wasn't a hack from some basement rat. That was military-grade override or worse. Outside, a distant rumble carried on the wind. I froze, listening. It wasn't thunder. It was engine. Heavy, fast, closing. I bolted, tires spinning as I gunned the truck back toward the highway. Behind me, the northern sky glowed with ghostlight auroras slashed with veins of white fire. And stitched across that bruised canvas, black silhouettes. Prowled the clouds in V-formations, not jets. Too slow, too silent. I drove like the road was collapsing under me, which wasn't far from the truth. For the next hour, my world narrowed to snow-streaked glass, tack needle flirting with red, and the drumbeat in my skull that said, "You've run out of time," when I finally hit a gas station outside Watson Lake. I ducked inside and killed another burner to scan the news feeds on an old terminal by the lottery machine. Headlines stacked like tombstones. Unexplained power grid failure sweeps Scandinavia. Multiple satellites go dark vision, denied by NORAD. Unscheduled launch from Bikaner Cosmodrome sparks tensions. And buried under the noise, a bulletin so surgical it chilled my blood. SETI detects non-random burst, patent equipment error. I didn't need to click the link. I knew the pattern. I'd seen it burned into the last frame of that Yukon video. Transmission complete. Awaiting response. The response had come. I fed cash into a vending machine for a stale sandwich, just to look normal, though nothing in the world felt normal now. On the muted TV bolted above the counter, a news anchor was smiling too hard, spinning calm while the Chiron crawled with words that made the air taste metallic. NORAD elevates alert status Arctic airspace. Restrictions in effect. The clerk glanced at me, suspicion flickering in his eyes like he'd seen my face on a watch list. Maybe he had. I paid, stepped into the cold, and kept driving. As night bled across the Yukon, for the second time in as many days, the hum came back not in the ground this time, but in the sky, a low drone that slithered through the wind, rising and falling in tones that weren't winds to make. When I killed the headlights and looked up, the auroras were gone. In their place hung a single black shape, rimmed in a halo of pale fire, blotting stars from horizon to horizon. And for the first time since this started, I understood what Aurora 67 had tried to tell me. This wasn't about building something from what they found. This was about bringing something back. I crossed into British Columbia by dawn, the truck running on fumes and nerves. The radio was dead except for bursts of static that didn't sound like weather. Every time I tried the sat phone, I got nothing but a hiss that crawled like ants across my skin. Whoever blacked out Marla's feed hadn't stopped there. They'd choked the lines tight at a truck stop near Fort Nelson. I bought a burner laptop from a driver who said he was quitting before the sky falls. He wasn't joking. His hands shook when he passed me the box. "You seen it?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I found a corner booth in the diner, plugged into the station's sputtering Wi-Fi, and tunneled through 6 proxies before I hit a SETI back door I'd kept warm since my newsroom days. It took 3 tries to crack the nodes. Someone had tightened the lock sput when the feed opened. My gut knotted, signal logs, raw, unfiltered. And there it was, a burst from deep space. Time-stamped 30 hours ago, 5 hours after the vault breach. Not random. Not noise. The pattern leaped at me like a pulse through glass. 12 beats. Pause. 12 more. Each cluster folded into harmonics that weren't just structured. They were recursive, self-similar across scales like DNA spirals, and overlaying those bursts, a secondary channel, weak but distinct. Frequency match, Yukon transmission band. I stared until the lines blurred, my coffee going cold as a simple truth carved its way through denial. The craft hadn't just woken up, it had phoned home, and someone had answered, scrolling. Deeper, I hit the commentary threads, the closed-loop chatter between SETI nodes and their military liaisons. Most was dry procedure, possible equipment anomaly, escalate to NORAD signals, intel. But then, in a flagged subreport, a phrase that stopped my breath cold, correlation observed with archival event Fox Lake incident, 1996. They knew, they'd always known. And now they were triangulating for impact. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as another thought hit like a knife twist. SETI wasn't just listening. They were transmitting back. I drilled into the outbound logs, pulse ticking like a metronome. There it was, a series of pings echoing the alien cadence, bounced through a satellite chain that read like a greatest hits of deep state cover stories. Keyhole, Lacrosse, Odinet. Their response packets weren't big, but they carried something. Commands, instructions, or an invitation. The last handshake, time-stamped for 12 Zulu. Less than an hour ago, I sat back hard, the booth creaking under me, the diner spinning in a haze of cheap neon and stale grease. Outside, the lot lay quiet under a lid of pewter sky. But it felt wrong, like a stage dressed for an audience that hadn't shown up yet. Then my laptop screen blinked. Once, twice, and a new window bloomed. Across the logs, access violation detected. Below it, a countdown, 10, 9, 8. I yanked the power, tore the battery free, and shoved both into the trash as I bolted for the truck. When I hit the highway, mirrors full of frost and fear, I saw them, 2 SUVs sliding out of the tree line, black as oil, their grills throwing up plumes of snow. They didn't run lights. They didn't need to. I drove like hell, the needle kissing red, tires whining against black ice. Behind me, the SUVs hung back just far enough to remind me they weren't in a hurry. And through it all, one thought gnawed like acid. The pattern wasn't just a call, it was a handshake. A deal struck in frequencies older than language, and somewhere out there, maybe in orbit, maybe beyond the maps, something was listening, something that had been promised more than silence. By the time I lost the SUVs, night had soaked the highway in ink. I veered onto a logging road, killed the lights, and crawled deep into the timber until the trees closed like jaws. There I waited, engine silent, heart loud. 10 minutes, 20. When the silence held, I dug out the sat phone's twin from a Faraday pouch and hit a number I'd sworn I'd never dial again. It rang once before, a voice, low and sounded raw, filled the line. Cross, you're either desperate or dead. Hello to you too, Sergei. Colonel Sergei Volkov, ex-GRU, now ghosting somewhere between defector and mercenary. We'd crossed paths in Kabul during a story that almost got me shot. Back then, he called me a fool with a death wish. He wasn't wrong. You still drinking battery acid for breakfast? I said, trying for levity I didn't feel. You still digging holes in your own grave? His sigh rasped like a saw on bone. Why call me? Because the sky's cracking open, and your old bosses might know why. A pause thick enough to chew. Then, what have you seen? Yukon Plateau, black triangle. Not ours, maybe not theirs either, but somebody woke it up. Another pause, shorter. I warned them this would happen, he muttered, almost to himself. What did Moscow do, Sergei? He exhaled smoke I could almost smell. Not Moscow, Washington. In 72, there was arrangement, trade. What? Mineral rights under Arctic ice, rare earth elements, uranium, things men kill countries for. In exchange, Americans share fragments of object. Wreckage found in Manitoba, 52. My unit saw files in Leningrad archive before they vanished into the black. Cold coiled down my spine. Fragments. You mean the same alloy I'm staring at in these logs? He didn't ask how I had logs. Maybe he already knew. Yes, bismuth magnesium lattice. Non-terrestrial signature. They tried to copy, failed. But they built things anyway. Hybrid platforms. Enough to scare both flags into silence. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles creaked. So Fox Lake wasn't a UFO. It was a Cold War Frankenstein. No, Sergei said softly. Fox Lake was insurance. Proof of concept to keep the pact alive. But something changed. What changed? Telemetry. Signals under Arctic ice. Not from humans. We listened. We should not have. His voice dipped, almost a whisper. Ethan, those signals your friends at SETI call them anomalies. They are not anomalies. They are invitations. The line hissed like sleet. Then a faint pop background hum snuffed mid-word. Sergei, nothing. Just dead air thick enough to choke on. Then the phone buzzed once in my palm. A new message bloomed across the screen. Channel compromised. Terminate. I flung the handset into the snow, watching it vanish like a sinking star. My pulse roared, a drumbeat syncing with the cold knowledge slamming home. Someone cut that line, not me. Not him. I sat there, breath fogging, staring at the dark wall of trees until a low rumble threaded through the silence. Not an engine this time, not wind. A resonance so deep it pressed the world inward. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching, and tilted my head toward the stars. The auroras were back. But wrong. Their bands pulsed like veins, throbbing in sync with a rhythm I recognized from SETI's burst logs. 12 beats. Pause, 12 more. The handshake dot, and far beyond the curtains of light. A silhouette slid across the void vast, slow, rimmed in. Pale fire. My breath froze halfway out of my throat. They weren't coming. They were already here. I drove through the night like the earth itself was on fire. Headlights carving tunnels through curtains of snow. The auroras bled overhead, green, violet, and something else. A flicker of white fire that didn't belong. It pulsed in the same cadence as the SETI bursts, 12 and 12, like a code knocking on the walls of the sky. By dawn, I hit an abandoned maintenance depot off the Alaska highway and slid the truck inside, killing the engine. My hands shook as I shoved crates against the doors and rigged the last of my motion sensors. Then I opened the laptop, air-gapped and scrubbed, and dug back into the drive. I'd barely scratched the surface before. Whole directories waited, names that read like fever dreams. Winter Sun, Keystone, Accord, Arc Protocol. The time stomps spanned decades, their earliest entries stamped in Cold War ink. I opened Keystone Accord first. It wasn't a report. It was a transcript, dense typewritten, watermarked with seals I hadn't seen outside vault photos. U.S. Air Force, Soviet Strategic Command. Dated June 18, 1972. Location, Reykjavik. The first line gutted me. Both parties acknowledge the object is not of terrestrial origin. I read on, heart pounding like a second clock. Mutual benefit requires controlled recovery, restricted disclosure. Arctic corridors designated as joint jurisdiction under cover of resource exploration. Then the phrase that froze my breath. In event of activation, initiate containment directive. Denial at all costs. It was signed by men whose names reshaped history in shadows, their signatures bleeding like old wounds across the page. My fingers hovered before clicking ARC protocol. This file was newer, 1994. It referenced Colossus by name. I skimmed, line after line, until one sentence hooked my lungs. Artifact demonstrates recursive signal behavior. Simulations predict event horizon if handshake completes. Probability curve exceeds 83% within 30-year window. Event horizon, not astrophysics. Here, it meant a point of no return. I leaned back, the chair groaning, and stared at the rafters while a single truth burned cold through the static. This wasn't a crash program. It was a covenant, a decades-long gamble between two superpowers, drunk on fear and ambition. They hadn't just hidden the artifact. They'd built their world around it, like priests circling a god they didn't understand. And now the god was awake. The laptop chimed a system alert, though no network tethered it. I froze, then watched as a new file spawned on the desktop, its icon pulsing like a heartbeat. Title, We Remember. I didn't open it. Couldn't, because outside, the wind stopped dead. I crossed to the grimy window and peeled back a slat of plywood. The trees stood motionless, their frost-laced limbs rigid as iron. No sway, no sound. Then I saw it low on the horizon, sliding between peaks like a blade through silk, black, silent, edges glowing with a pallid shimmer that made the snow boil where it passed. The craft it banked slowly, a leviathan pivoting with predatory grace until its nose angled toward the depot. My breath fogged the glass as a whisper I couldn't place threaded through the walls. Not sound, but sensation and idea pressing against the inside of my skull. Come closer. My legs moved before reason caught up. 2 steps toward the door, then 3, before I wrenched myself still and slammed my back to the wall. Gasping like a man dragged from undertow, the roof vibrated, dust raining from beams as a shadow eclipsed the world outside. Then, sudden as a dropped curtain, light fled white, blinding, searing through cracks in the plywood. My retinas screamed, and in that light, another thought unfurled like smoke in water, cold and calm and absolute. You were never here by accident. I clawed for the laptop, jammed the drive free, and stuffed both into the lead pouch. When the glare dimmed, the shadow was gone, leaving only silence so deep it felt hollow. Then my motion sensor chirped 3 soft beeps. Not from the door, from inside. I spun, heart detonating, and froze. She stood by the stairwell, parka dripping, meltwater hair plastered to her face. Lisa, gun in one hand, something worse in her eyes. You really thought you were the only one chasing ghosts, she said. My mouth was dust. They'll kill us both. Her smile was a blade. You still don't get it, Ethan. They're not here to kill us. She took a step closer, boots whispering on the concrete, and the cold truth hit like a hammer. They were here to take us back. Lisa's gun never wavered. Her parka steamed in the brittle air, melting frost to rivulets on the concrete floor. Behind her, the stairwell yawned black, humming with a sound I felt before I heard it, the same subterranean pulse that haunted the Yukon nights, louder now. "Closer, you brought it back," I said, voice thin as thread. Her smile was tired, feral, brought. "No, we woke what never slept." The words hit like ice water. "This isn't a craft. It's something alive." Her eyes flickered not denial, not confirmation. Just the look of someone who's seen a truth too big for language. Alive isn't the word. It's aware, and it remembers. The laptop and the lead pouch felt like a furnace against my ribs. "That thing outside it knows me. It knows everything that's ever touched it," she said, stepping closer. "Every hand, every signal, every thought we bled into it for 70 years. You think you're hunting it, Ethan. You've been on its map since the day you pulled your first file." The hum surged, rolling through the depot like a slow-motion quake. Dust sifted from the rafters, dancing in shafts of grey light. Somewhere, beyond the plywood, a glow pulsed white, then amber, then a shade I can't name, like colour stripped to its bones. Lisa glanced toward it, jaw tight. "We need to move." "Now," I barked, a laugh sharp enough to hurt. "Move where?" "You've got 2 SUVs full of shooters on my tail and a flying monolith stalking the horizon." Her voice snapped like a whip. "This isn't about you anymore." The handshake completed. The words routed me cold. "You mean SETI's bursts weren't a signal?" she cut in. "They were an answer." The silence stretched until the hum devoured it. My pulse synced to that rhythm, 12 and 12, the same cadence etched into the Yukon sky. I wanted to ask what they promised, what they agreed to trade, but the look in her eyes killed the question before it formed. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. "What's under the ice, Lisa?" Her breath fogged like smoke. "Not a what." She glanced at the ceiling as the depot lights flickered and died, plunging us into a grey bruise of daylight leaking through the cracks. Aware, then the floor shuddered. A groan tore through. The earth a sound older than stone, vibrating up through my boots into my spine. Concrete split with a dry, surgical crack, and steam geysered from the fissures, stinking of iron and ozone. Tools clattered off benches. Crates toppled like dominoes. Lisa holstered her gun, which scared me more than the muzzle. "We've got 2 minutes," she said. "Maybe less. To what?" "To get clear before this place becomes a throat." The floor dropped 3 inches under my boots, slow but relentless, like the ground was exhaling. I bolted for the truck, but Lisa caught my arm with a grip like a vice. "Forget the truck. Come on." She dragged me toward the stairwell, down into the depot's underbelly, where the air grew hot and wet, tasting of copper. Emergency lights strobed weakly along the walls, painting the corridor in arterial red. My boots splashed through metal, pooling in seams of concrete. The hum was deafening now, shaking droplets from the ceiling like sweat from a giant's brow. We hit a blast door, yawning open on hydraulics that bled rust. Beyond it sprawled a shaft that plunged into blackness, its walls ribbed with steel and cables fat as serpents. A freight elevator hung on a trembling tether, its cage yawning like a mouth. Lisa shoved me inside and slammed the gate. The lift dropped so fast, my stomach tried to crawl out my throat. The red lights stretched into comets as we plunged into heat and darkness, deeper than basements, deeper than reason. When we stopped, the air was a furnace, damp and throbbing. The gate screeched open on a cavern that stole what breath I had left. It wasn't a room. It was a wound in the world, an abyss hollowed from permafrost and plated in steel. Catwalks spider-webbed across its throat, and there, nested in a cradle of girders and floodlights, lay something that made the Fox Lake craft look like a child's toy. A ring, perfect, colossal, half buried in ice black as obsidian. Its surface crawling with symbols that shifted when I tried to look straight. Steam boiled from vents along its rim, carrying the stink of worlds that don't know our sky. Lisa's voice ghosted at my shoulder. Ark, the name slotted into memory, a file on the drive stamped with warnings that bled red. Ark Protocol, this was the plan, she said, almost reverent. If the handshake succeeded, this was phase 2. I couldn't move. Couldn't think past the weight of it pressing against my mind like a tide. The hum wasn't hum anymore. It was language, and it was speaking to something inside me that wanted to answer. Lisa grabbed my arm. We light the failsafe. We bury. This under 100 megatons. Maybe her words died under a new sound, a voice, but not human, peeling through the air like a molten glass. It wasn't in my ears. It was in me. Integration in progress. Lisa's nails dug crescents into my sleeve. It shows you, she hissed. The floor lurched, catwalks screaming as chains snapped like gunshots. The ring tore free of the ice in a geyser of steam, rising like a god shrugging off its grave. Light poured from its core white, searing, absolute, flooding the cavern until the world burned away. And in that brilliance, one thought bloomed in a voice older than empires.com as death. Prepare for transit. Light swallowed everything. No edges, no shadows, just a white so pure it felt alive, pressing against my eyelids until I wasn't sure if my eyes were open or burned shut. The roar in my skull drowned thought, yet under it ran a thread of voice that wasn't sound, smooth as glass, cold as vacuum. Prepare for transit. Then the brilliance fractured like shattered glass, and the world slammed back. I was on the catwalk, what was left of it. Steel twisted like licorice, hanging over a cavity where the floor had been. Below, the arc rose on a column of light that pulsed like a living spine, its rim shedding slabs of ancient ice into the abyss. Steam boiled upward in clouds reeking of ozone and iron. Lisa clung to a girder 10 feet away, hair plastered to her face, her mouth moving round words the roar chewed to dust. Her eyes locked on me hard, wild, and in that instant, I saw something I'd never seen in her. Fear that had no bottom. The voice came again, threading through bone. Transit window. Imminent. My teeth rattled as the arc tilted, rotating with a grace obscene for something so vast. Inside its core, light condensed white first, then blue, then black, as if it was spinning a hole through reality. Heat rolled off it in waves that seared my skin even through the frost-soaked parka. Lisa hauled herself along the girder, closing the gap like a soldier crawling through fire. Her voice hit me in shards between tremors. Fail, safe control, hubist, gantry move. I moved, or tried. The catwalk pitched like a ship in a hurricane, bucking under concussive shocks that thundered up from the shaft. Alarms wailed in tones I didn't recognize, frequencies that felt like scalpels scraping the inside of my skull. Half running, half crawling, I hit the gantry, a rusted tongue of steel, jutting toward a bank of consoles clinging to the cavern. Wall screens bled static under strobe lights, their surfaces spiderwebbed with cracks. I slammed my hands onto the main panel, breath tearing at my throat. A prompt blinked in red. Failsafe, armed. Below it, a warning. Massive cascade, detonation yield. 112, mount enough to erase this place from every map, to melt the bones of the plateau into slag. Lisa's voice knifed through the howl. Do it. My thumb hovered over the final key, then the screens shifted. Static collapsed into clarity, and something stared back at me. Not a face, a geometry, a lattice of light folding into itself, spirals within spirals, endless and patient. It pulsed in sync with the hum that had been riding my bones since Fox Lake. And then, words not printed, not spoken, but carved straight into the meat of thought. Termination negates covenant. Integration ensures survival. Images flooded in cities strangled in smoke, oceans curling to steam, stars wheeling over horizons I didn't know. Not threats, forecasts, probabilities, arcing like lightning across the synapses of a mind older than language. My hand trembled over the key. If I hit it, maybe I'd stop this, bury the arc, silence the hum, cauterize the wound before it split the world. Or maybe I'd just light the fuse on a war we couldn't fight, couldn't win, because the enemy wasn't coming. It had been here all along. Lisa staggered up beside me, face carved in sweat and soot. Ethan, she gasped, eyes locked on mine. Press it now. But the voice drowned her out, wrapping around thought like silk soaked in ice. You were chosen before. You understood choice. The floor convulsed. A blast of air hurled us both against the console as the ark tore free of its cradle. Chains snapped, screaming like tortured metal. The shaft became a throat of light, swallowing girders, catwalks, machines, everything. Screaming downward into that abyss. And then the ceiling split. Night poured through, veined with auroras that burned too bright for eyes to bear. Snow scythed in on a wind that tasted of iron and electricity. And through that wound in the earth, the Colossus descended, black, triangular, edges rhymed in fire, silent as a shadow sliding over the bones of God. It hovered above the ark like a benediction. Then impossibly it docked, their rims kissing in a corona of white fire that vaporized the frost off my skin. The hum swelled into a hymn that made my ribs ache, and in its rhythm I heard something worse than prophecy. I heard welcome. Lisa clawed at my arm, hauling me toward the service ladder as the cavern tore itself apart. Steel screamed. Ice collapsed in avalanches of boiling mist. Behind us, the twin leviathans fused into a single silhouette, a geometry that unmade sense ring and triangle interlocked, birthing a bloom of light that ate shadows like fire eats. Dry grass. We burst into the night on a tongue of fractured concrete, the plateau shivering under our boots. Above, the sky writhed Doros, flaring into sheets of white, so bright they burned constellations out of existence. And from that light, the Colossus rose vaster now, its edges dripping radiance, its core a hole through which stars bent like reeds in a storm. NORAD fighters knifed in from the south F-22s, spitting contrails like scars across the dark. Fanned wide, banked hard, locked missiles, froze. I saw it in the tilt of their wings, the arc of their climb. A command had just cut their strings. Stand down. Same as 96. The Colossus climbed, silent, patient, bearing its cargo of light, into a sky that no longer belonged to us. And as it passed through the veil of Auroras, a pressure bloomed in my skull, gentle, inexorable, absolute, ascension phase, complete, awaiting integration. I dropped to my knees in snow that hissed like steam, lungs clawing for air that wouldn't come. Above me, the Colossus dwindled into a star that wasn't a star, dragging the night behind it like a shroud. Lisa stood a few feet away, her face turned skyward, lips moving soundlessly. Prayer or surrender, I couldn't tell. The wind died. Silence poured in, heavy as the void. And in that hush, a single truth burned like ice behind my eyes. This wasn't the end of the world. It was the beginning of someone else's eye. Don't remember how long we stayed there kneeling on a plateau that no longer felt like earth, the sky raw and bleeding light where the Colossus vanished. Snow hissed against molten seams in the concrete. The air stank of iron and ozone, a taste that clung to the back of my throat like copper coins. Lisa stood motionless, her silhouette etched in auroral afterglow, lips still moving around words I couldn't hear. When sound returned, it wasn't wind. It was the low growl of rotors chopping through the bruised sky. Black hawks, 2 of them, sweeping in low from the south, their blades coughing plumes of spindrift across the ruin, doors yawning, rifles bristling. No insignia, just mat. Black skins drinking the light. Lisa turned, eyes flat as slate. "You come with me," she said, voice stripped to wire. I laughed, raw and hollow. After what we just saw, I'm not walking into a steel box with men who erase names for a living. Her jaw flexed. "This isn't about you anymore, Ethan." "No," I said, dragging myself upright on legs that felt borrowed. "It's about them." I tapped the lead pouch under my parka, the drive still there, heavy as sin. Her gaze flicked down, then back up, cold fire banked behind her eyes. "That's not your insurance policy. That's a death warrant." "Maybe," I said, "but it's the only piece of truth left in a world spinning lies fast enough to tear itself apart." The Black Hawks flared, rotors screaming as ropes hissed down. Operators spilled like ink across the snow faces masked. Rifles cradled, moving with a precision that made breathing feel optional. Lisa's voice softened, almost pitying. "You think you can leak this and walk away? We buried this program. Under 7 governments and 3 currencies. We turned satellites into ghosts to keep it cold. Do you really think one burned-out reporter can outpace a machine built to wipe history clean?" I stared past her, at the soldiers fanning out in arcs that smelled of choreography, not chaos. Behind them, the night had healed no auroras, no glow, just the brittle glitter of stars that suddenly looked like lies. "I don't need to outpace it," I said. "I just need to light it up before they switch the sky off for good." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll burn with it. Maybe. That's the point." The hum came back, then not from the ground, not from above, but inside. Soft at first, like the whisper of blood in veins. Then louder, threading thought like wire, blooming into words no mouth spoke. Integration pending. I staggered, clutching. My skull as images detonated behind my eyes, fractals of light folding through impossible geometries, cities corkscrewed into glass, oceans boiling into steam, futures unspooled like film melting in a projector. And under it all, that voice called, patient, absolute, "You are the bridge, Ethan." Lisa's hands slammed my shoulders, dragging me back into gravity. Her face was a blur of steel and fear. "Fight it. Do you hear me? Fight it." The world snapped into focus as a shadow knifed across the Snowther Black Hawks, banking hard, rotors shrieking like tortured metal. Operators raised rifles in perfect synchrony, and in that instant I saw it. Not rescue, not retrieval. Termination. Lisa saw it too. Her head whipped toward the nearest bird, eyes widening as muzzle flashes stitched the night. She moved before thought caught up, tackling me sideways as bullets chewed the air where I'd been standing. We hit hard, snow exploding under our weight. Lisa rolled, came up firing short. Surgical bursts that dropped 2 men before the third, cut her down in a spray of crimson mist. Her body folded like paper, eyes still locked on mine, lips shaping a word I'll never know. I crawled to her, hands slick, the cold biting deeper than grief. Then the hum surged, drilling through marrow, and the world tilted. The operators froze mid-stride, weapons slack, heads canting like puppets with their strings cut. One by one, they dropped kneeling, then prone. As if gravity had become a verdict, the rotors faltered, coughing and choking. Both Black Hawks, yawed sideways, slammed into the plateau in twin blossoms of fire. Shrapnel screamed across the ruin, heat washing over me in waves that reeked of jet fuel and scorched steel. And through the smoke, the voice came again, filling the hollow where my fear used to live. The covenant holds. Ascension requires a witness. Light flared on the horizon white, clean, absolute pouring from a point high in the stratosphere where no star should burn. The Colossus, climbing, the arc fused to its heart like a black sun birthing a halo. I didn't think so. I ran, across the mangled skeleton of the depot, through drifts that clawed at my legs, lungs tearing as the cold shredded them raw. I ran until the last of the plateau fell behind and the world narrowed to the glow leaking from the clouds like blood through gauze. At the truck miraculously upright, windshield laced with fractures, I ripped the laptop from its pouch, jammed the drive home and watched the desktop bloom like a wound. Folders cascaded open, spilling blueprints, logs, treaties stamped with seals no daylight ever saw. My fingers flew, jamming them into packets, splitting proxies, scattering shards of truth across dead, drops in corners of the net built for ghosts. The progress bar crawled like a dying snake. 40%, 67%, 89%. Done. I killed the laptop, flung it into the snow, and watched sparks gutter from its shattered spine. Somewhere far above, the glow thickened, pulsing like a second moon. Clouds writhed in its halo, veined with lightning that wasn't lightning, until the sky tore widened, the Colossus slid through, bearing the arc like a jewel in its jaws, silent, perfect, infinite, and in the quiet after the storm. I understood the last truth no file could hold. This wasn't an invasion. It was a reclamation. The hum ebbed, leaving an echo in bone a promise or a sentence. I couldn't tell. You were never ours. I sat there until the stars healed over the wound in the sky, frost creeping across my gloves, blood drying to rust on my sleeves. By dawn, the plateau was just a scar of smoke and silence, the world pretending nothing had happened. News feeds later would choke on distraction market tremors, cyber attacks, a polar vortex to explain the lights. NORAD would deny everything with the calm of men who've sold their souls, too often to remember the price. But out there, beyond the rim of our maps, the Colossus was climbing. And somewhere in its black heart, the arc was spinning, counting down to a clock no human ever set. I don't know how long we have, days, years, maybe less, but I know this, the files are out. The truth is bleeding. And if you're hearing these words, you're already inside the shadow they left behind. Pray it's enough, because when they come back, And it won't be for the sky. It'll be for what we built beneath it. If you enjoyed this dive into one of the most chilling UFO mysteries ever recorded, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's as obsessed with alien encounters and cover-up stories as you are. Your support keeps these hidden truths alive.